horrifying thing about this is that some deeply obnoxious and venal anchors have taken it upon themselves to be not just witness, which is the job of the press, but witness, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner rolled into one. And the result is that even if the police conclude their work and come up with the truth, and that is now established in a court of law, there will still be a lingering whiff of suspicion having been created by the lies that have been assiduously spread in a quest for TRPs. And it's really sad that our media culture has become like this. I've actually had, very many moments of thinking I really ought to take some sort of legal action. My lawyers advise me that I cannot do so until the investigation is over. But as somebody who has never, when I went through an earlier bout of being falsely maligned in the press during the so-called IPL controversy, I chose at that point not to take legal action, feeling this was a free press playing its role in a political democracy. Subsequently, when other kinds of maligning occurred, I felt at this point one should take action. I was advised, look, you will sue, you will spend an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of emotional energy, and the case won't be heard for many years. Is it worth it? Now, if media organizations are going to get away with the expectation that most of their victims will not be able to take effective action against them, then they will continue to be irresponsible. They'll continue to convict innocent people. They'll continue to ruin lives, break news and break heads, break reputations. So I think at some point, some of us will have to stand up and confront this. The Press Council, the Editors Guild have all been very, very weak as institutions, sadly, in confronting all of this. So maybe one will have to look at legal institutions to see what we can do, because this is not just irresponsible, it's dangerous for our society.
And how did you decide to take, when these controversies erupted and the media is hounding you, how did you decide to take the decision that, you won't go into radio silence like other politicians do when confronted with controversy, but you would continue with your professional life and your professional engagements at the risk of appearing to some as brazen?
No, that was a risk I had to take. Initially, in fact, I did go into radio silence. Certainly the shock of losing my wife was enough to ensure that I went off Twitter or any public appearance for about 6 weeks. And for about 3 of those weeks, I actually physically lost my voice. And it was obviously a psychological situation, but I literally couldn't have been heard anyway. But after that, when I finally re-emerged, it was because, first of all, I knew that I had done nothing wrong, number one, and there was no reason to be cowed by false accusations into silence. Second, I had an obligation to those who had voted for me to serve their interests, and I couldn't do that in silence. And third, a few months down the road, I would have an election to fight. And either I would run away, which some would immediately see as an admission of guilt, or I would face the electorate and ask them to judge me for the person they knew me to be. And I chose consciously the latter course. And in the end, yes, certainly a lot of damage was done. Rival political parties sent squads into the homes of voters to say, how can you vote for this man? He murdered his wife. But I still managed. I think enough people disbelieved the lies that I still managed to win despite the ranting on television.
I have to admit that I don't know about people in the audience, but I was surprised that you won in an election where many Congress heavyweights were routed, and you had the double whammy of having this cloud following you. Were you surprised?
No, I wasn't surprised because I had worked very hard for the preceding 5 years. The one good thing that came out of my resignation from the External Affairs Ministry was suddenly I had time for the constituency that in that job I didn't have. And I really devoted myself, and I got a lot of things done, which hadn't been done by any of my far more illustrious predecessors, including, for example, a national highway bypass project that had been stuck for 40 years. The stones had been laid, but nothing had been done. I got all the bureaucracy moving and in here in Delhi and the funding done, and that bypass became reality. And a number of other things, trains for the constituency. A lot of lives were changed for the better by things that I was able to ensure were done. And voters, fortunately, remembered that and voted for that and not for other things.
That was the election you won. As somebody who you said were very good at taking exams, when you decided to step back from the election to the United Nations Secretary General, withdraw from it. Did that sting?
Yeah, that was hard because, I really spent my entire adult life in the United Nations. I was 22 when I joined the UN, 22 in 2 months, not even 2 months. So I really had spent my entire life there. I had had an unusually interesting career, and I had worked in all the key fields of the UN, humanitarian work, refugee work, peacekeeping, political, been in the Security Council, worked in the Secretary General's office, run my own department, handled budgets and management, all of this stuff. So in many ways, I had felt uniquely prepared for that position. But, of course, I had enough sense to realize that a Secretary General's election is not about the best resume. It is ultimately a political decision made by a handful of member states in the Security Council. And you have to accept that those are the bases on which that decision will be made. So when it happened, I certainly accepted that was the outcome, but certainly it meant for me a huge change in my life and my plans, because if I had not contested, I had many, many years to go, at least a decade to go at the United Nations as a career person. I could have continued, and I would have to reinvent my life at that point. But equally, I could have looked back. It was a very short campaign, just 3.5 months. I was nominated by the government of India only in June, which was a bit later than perhaps was ideal for this contest. And in many ways, I would have had to look back on those 3.5 months and say, should I have done it? But my answer was yes, it was worth doing, it was worth trying to do. And there I really did take refuge. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I took refuge in the lesson of the Gita, that you really have to try and do something without expectation of reward or without focusing on the outcome. And the outcome turned out to be 2 votes short, one of which was a permanent member, and that was enough to knock me out of the fray. But the effort was worth making. And of course, there was the consolation that out of 7 candidates, who included a deputy prime minister, a clutch of foreign ministers, a sitting president of a country, and a prince, that I still managed to come second, beating the lot of them.
Well,
so
I mean,
you
look back now, and given the expectation that we Indians have of people of Indian origin, whether it's a Preet Bharara or a Bobby Jindal, you would have, if you were the Secretary General right now, you would probably be personally held responsible if India was not a permanent member of the Security Council right now. So maybe there's some, it was a narrow escape. We're running out of time, so I wanted to open it up for questions, and I'll give you some of the Twitter questions as well. But as we pass the mic around, I wanted to ask you, since you talked about the flawed legal system, which has, photographs that were splashed out in the media and terrible things happened in the course of the investigation. So how much faith do you have in that same flawed system to vindicate you?
Look, I mean, one has to believe in the system. I mean, it's the system we've got. I very much have cooperated throughout with the investigation, whatever their requests and requirements, and they have raided my home and taken away phones and all of the stuff, and I've cooperated in every way with all of this. I've even done something which I never thought I'd ever do to another human being, which is giving them access to all my emails, which they have dutifully copied onto a hard drive. So they've looked thoroughly, and I believe that in a fair-minded probe, that there's absolutely no way in which I can be found wanting in terms of cooperation. The police themselves have said so. The supposition that a crime has occurred rests entirely on the word of an extremely suspect individual, a doctor facing charges of plagiarism and incompetence. So it's something the police have to investigate is whether there was a crime at all, and that's what they're investigating. Because this gentleman has alleged that there was poisoning without having produced any evidence. There's no visual evidence of any poisoning, and no chemical evidence of any poisoning has been found. So on what he's based himself, he has yet to explain. So there will be an entire process. I'm sure at the end of it all, a reasonable conclusion will be found, and whatever that conclusion is, I will then have to draw my own, shall we say, stand on whether this has been a fair process in the end or not. But I start off with the premise that people will be fair. In matters of life and death, these are not issues where biases or political agendas or other issues should come in and determine
One hopes.
our conclusion. So I'm certainly hoping and believing in the fairness and integrity of the process.